particular interest to me. So that's me and my affiliations. And I'm here today because a few years ago, Suzanne and I were chit-chatting. I forget actually where we initially met because we did other things before we started the Roundtable series. But then
Aaron and introduced us.
Aaron was the introducer of us. That's right. It's been pandemic is a black hole in my mind.
Well, I
Uh,
think we chatted even before that while you were still finishing your
we
PhD
did. We met in the before
pre-pandemic
times,
in the
in the first
BC.
stage of pre this. And yeah, but at some point we had this idea to do some research roundtables about these particular intersections, and so here we are with another one, and out of that came a roundtable at the International Leadership Association conference, and also a panel that several members who are here today were on the panel, and some who regrettably can't make it today were on the panel at the International Leadership Association conference. So it's quite possible and maybe even intentional that future projects and collaborations may spring from the people on this call meeting to talk about it, or perhaps a few of us, or even those who aren't here, decide to help use the transcript to create some sort of tool or output. But otherwise, it's meant to be the hallway conversations that we have at the conference, minus the conference. So just the fun part. Um, all right. Uh, so that's why I'm here today. So what I did in my introduction is a little bit long form version, name, affiliation, and why I came to this roundtable. So my interest in being here is part of this longer picture, but also the use of these strategies in terms of facilitation is in my line of work and research. All right. So we can go in any order as long as there aren't too many prolonged silences in between. Name, affiliation, and what made you come to this?
Oh, why don't we go in order of hair length? I think Bill, you win on the shortest hair. We'll go short to long.
Oh, is that right? Okay. So my name is Bill White. I'm a professor of communication arts and sciences at Penn State Altoona. And my research interest, I guess I would describe it as I'm interested in GMing, that is game mastering, tabletop role playing, as situated learning, and more broadly, tabletop role playing game communities of play, practice, and knowledge production. And Joe, I guess, extended an invitation. I encountered him at NCA's, the National Communication Association, Game Studies Division pre-conference, and the notion of safety as something that is part of the discourse of tabletop role playing is something that's interesting to me. And so it seems like as study communities of play, thinking about that is important.
Thank you. Thomas, I think you're up next.
Yeah, probably because I just cut my hair. Damn. Yeah, Tuomas Harviainen. I'm a professor of information studies and interactive media at Tampere University in Finland. And I've done stuff together with both Aaron and Bill before. With Bill, we've co-authored also. So some familiar faces here. My interest is that I used to be one of the editors of Simulation and Gaming for 5 years, and before that several years at the International Journal of Role Playing and so forth. So I've been following these topics for quite a while, and while I've not necessarily researched them much myself, I've been familiar with the work of others, which has been going through my hands and before my eyes over the years. Nice being here.
Thank you. Mickey?
Hi, so I'm Mickey. I'm happy to be here. Let me see. Affiliation. I'm a graduate student in the School of Social Work at the University of Southern Maine. I recently presented a book at USM's Research Symposium, Thinking Matters, about integrating dialectical behavior therapy with Dungeons and Dragons. And this sort of was an outgrowth of field work that I've done before. And I'm really sort of curious as to how I could sort of build on the book learn more from the wealth of expertise that's here. And sort of going forward, I'm really, really interested to see there are a lot of ways to apply games, learning, and therapy together, and that's sort of my trajectory.
Thank you. Aaron.
Hello, I'm Aaron Vanek. I'm unaffiliated. I'm an independent game designer and producer. I teach game design to a homeschool community of young children, and I'm very interested in how live action role playing can be used for education, social change, and other things like that, and using it as a pedagogy, as Joe was saying. But I'm just really happy to be here and talk about this topic. And I recognize a lot of people that I haven't seen in a while. Hi.
Thank you. Garrett?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the mute. Hi, I'm Garrett Dwarman. I'm with Creative Crisis Leadership, working with Suzanne. Relatively new to working with games. I learned about it pretty much upon joining Suzanne a few years ago. And with her, we've been designing games to teach communities about resilience in the face of disaster, and eager to learn more about games. So all this is fascinating to me.
Thank you. I think, Antonio, it's you or me. Okay, I think I
That's
would.
Suzanne.
So I'm Suzanne Ewell. I am the founder and executive director of Creative Crisis Leadership. As Garrett says, we do a variety of games, short board game, but we have right now a game that we play with groups of people that incorporate some form of role play, typically, not adopting a persona, but have a narrative and a story. So people play through a disaster in some form and do the discovery and thinking of their own. We play them we have a short game we do at community fairs. The longer interactive group games we do in group settings like Kiwanis Club meetings, various organizational meetings. So the concern we run into, of course, is that we want to know, are we having an impact? Does this work? And there's some deep research questions. My personal research interest is in improvised leadership. What happens when a group of people come together and leadership has to emerge or emerges when there is no designated leader and no clear problems? But we can't interrupt. We run this in real community settings. So getting research data is very difficult without disrupting what people expect and what they do. So that's my interest. Antonio?
Sam, have you gone though? With Skip Sam?
I think Sam, I thought you have your hair up, Sam?
No, I have short hair. It's buzzed.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw a little bit, and it may be the way it's
long on top, short in the back, so I'm kind of both.
All right, Sam. I'm sorry. I thought you had a bun.
No
buns.
Yeah, so yes, Samantha Funk. I work in the nonprofit sector within the federal government, essentially, and graduate of USM within the leadership development program, and worked with Joe and Suzanne on my master's thesis utilizing leadership, role-playing games and creativity. So where I'm coming at this with my interest is I'm really interested in exploring the intersection between creativity and leadership, and where role-playing games comes to bridge that gap, and bringing that comprehensive picture of the importance of permission to play and its effect on group dynamics and emotional intelligence and practices in empathy. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Hi everyone, my name is Antonio Ruiz. I am an adjunct professor at Florida State University teaching leadership theory and application. My research background and focus is leadership studies and the use of games as a pedagogy. My dissertation focused specifically on role-playing games as adaptive leadership pedagogy. So that's something I've been working with a lot. I've been working a lot with Joe. I met Bill at the same conference. So I don't know some of the people here. I've been with Suzanne and Garrett to a couple of conferences. So a lot of familiar faces. Same with Garrett. Yeah, that's why I'm here today. It's what I lead, breathe, and work. It's just pretty much just another Wednesday or Thursday, whatever day it is.
Yeah.
Great, and congratulations on your recent graduation, Dr. Antonio Ruiz.
I was just going to ask that. Congratulations.
One
Yeah,
more,
thank you.
one more published dissertation on role-playing games, everybody. So, all right. Wonderful, great. What a wealth of perspectives and experience and interest we have here, even with just the people who are able to make it today. Very fun. So given the topic is about safety in the facilitation of role-playing games, with an eye towards pedagogy or some applied sense, whether that's therapy or education or leadership, if we could draw on everyone's experience for our first round of the roundtable discussion, if each person could comment, not comprehensively necessarily, on the topic, your experience with safety in RPG facilitation. And so this may be something you have done, some research you have done, something or a question that you have about it based on your own experience, personal, professional, or otherwise. So the question, before we do that, actually, in the spirit of networking, if you would like to be available to be contacted, please type your email into the chat now. And then all the emails will be in the same spot on the chat for the people who wish to be contacted.
And while we're doing that, Joe, a format question. You have a question for us. Do you want conversation about what individual do you want between each person? Do you want comments, questions for them, or do you want to hold them till we've done a round?
So the first round, let's get everybody's, elevator speech of what we're bringing to the topic, and then we'll see where the discussion goes. After that, the rounds will be a little bit more back and forth.
Right. So we'll hold off on questions and comments.
Yeah. So yeah, take note if you have questions or comments for someone or what comes up for you. The purpose of the first round is to get the topic populated with potential. And then we'll see if there's themes or just particular things that are just very interesting or what comes out of that. But that way we get all the voices in the room on the topic, at least introductory speaking. Okay, so Antonio's participating in the chat. That's cool. I will put the prompt question in the chat as well. And feel free to use the chat throughout in terms of just adding references and stuff like that. And use the raise hand function or just literally raise your hand. I can see all of the screens here I can try and moderate the discussion if we get really excited about it. But I'll just try to make sure that the stuff in the chat is complementing what's going on in the voice conversation and as a parking lot, so we can go back to it, and then we don't end up having 3 different conversations at the same time. All right. So feel free to put thoughts in the chat, especially for this first round, but let's just kind of have a comment from each person to get us started, an elevator pitch of your experience with safety in RPGs.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood. That's what I put in the chat originally, but I can elaborate on Lines and Bells / Session Zero because they kind of go hand in hand. So something I like to run, not only in education, but mostly out of leisure, is horror RPGs, which tend to have difficult topics sometimes. And that's where I learned about this tool known as lines and veils. And it's a conversation in which you talk to your players beforehand during session 0, and you asked about what is okay with them for it to happen in the campaign. What are things that is okay, but they don't want role played. Like it can happen in the story, but it's not something that they live. And then what are topics that are completely off limits? So having that kind of like division between different topics. So for instance, let's say that for the sake of the argument, I'm okay with spiders and I'm okay with vampires, but if vampire bites me, I don't want to have to witness that. You can just say that it happened as like an afterthought. And I am totally not okay with zombies, for instance. I'm just really simplifying these topics, but having that conversation beforehand, it really elevates the feeling of safety and being able to get into character later on for players, because the trust, just you start the conversation with putting trust on the line, and really being respectful about what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. So it's something that I like to start with, and also often revisit throughout the campaign and see if there's any changes to that, anything they want to add or remove even. But yeah, that's one of my go-tos.
Thanks for getting us started.
Question? What is
Yes.
session 0?
Session 0 is something you should always do before you start a new campaign. And it is an opportunity to get to, sometimes players will create their characters and introduce them there, not always, but it's also an opportunity to talk to your players about what are things do you want the campaign to have? What are some of their goals as players? What are the things they want to experience? Again, that tough conversation on safety. What are the things that it's okay to have and not have in the campaign? And it just really sets the expectations for what they're going to be experiencing as a DM and as a player.
Bill, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to go next, or do we want to?
Yeah, I'll go next. I just want to mention. I put in the. I'll put in the chat an article I wrote for the Japanese Journal of Analog Role Playing Game Studies about the discourse of safety, starting at the Forge, 25 years ago, which is where, of course, Lines and Veils begins as a topic. And so the paper talks about the discourse of safety, or the rhetoric of safety, in the sense that there's a conversation that surrounds it, and that includes, some fairly disparate positions on what it is, how it works, and there's some nuances in the safety discourse that I think are interesting to explore. For example, the notion of nobody gets hurt versus I will not abandon you as poles of support for other people's play, and the dynamics of how that gets talked about today is one of the interesting aspects of safety. And there are certain techniques that some people resist because they, for example, the X card, which is just an index card in the center of the table with an X on it that you say, if I touch this, or if you can touch it in the middle of play, and we remove something from play, or I don't want to do that. And the notion that, maybe that's a kind of silencing that feels a little bit oppressive in some manner is something that also gets, so the nuances of safety are interesting to consider and to see how those get talked about in the actual discourse of role playing.
Ooh, great, thanks for the link. Does somebody have something to bounce off of that? Sam?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, kind of bouncing off of both Antonio and William, that in my own experiences with the X card and actually, yes, the X card, for that fear of, people are human, people experience things as life goes on. So things that may have not been issues before the game started may have become an issue later on as game goes on. So my in my experience, we've come up with something that's a little bit different than the X card. It was more like a hand signal to the DM. And it's just something as simple as just like crossing your fingers over each other. And it's so simple that you can just do it really quickly with your DM so that they know. And it's not as blatant as like tapping the card on the table, so it's not as overt. Kind of it. And there's been other points where we've even had I've had a DM say just text me, because we've had phones in games before, so sometimes it's easy to just be mindful of that that fear of being like, yeah, I had said that this wasn't an issue beforehand, but now it is, and not wanting to like ruin that flow. But yeah, the hand signal is always fun, or a good way to do it.
Aaron?
Yeah, I'll jump in on the hand signal. So in live action role playing, which is like tabletop role playing, except you're moving in person, and you're kind of acting out your actions as a character instead of narrating them in a oral storytelling situation. And my wife and I, after a LARP, developed a hand signal to let us know things called the OK check. We developed that years ago, so it was just a little OK sign, which unfortunately has taken negative connotations recently, unfortunately. But there was a reason for that we developed something like that. It came out of necessity. And what that was in the live action role playing situation was our characters were in different places, hers and mine. She ran by me crying, and I reacted to her as a person instead of a character. So I broke a conversation that I was having with my character and went to her, and she's crying in the bathroom because I thought something happened outside the LARP. She hurt herself or something like that. And she's like, no, I'm just role playing, get the F out of here. And she was upset. And I'm like, oh. And so afterwards we were talking, I'm like, I'd love to have some kind of sign that I know you're okay, you're role playing, you're not actually in distress. And so it was designed to hold that up. And it became a situation where you can ask, it's an unspoken nonverbal ask, are you okay? So we're essentially doing is asking that you're okay. You go like this, and then you're supposed to respond like, yeah, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. And we've used it a couple times because we like to split up in LARPs and get different things. So across the room, I could see how she's doing as an actual person, kind of go like this. But there was a second use that came out of that, which I think sort of relates to a little bit of the topic that, or the question that I meant is like, who's responsible for safety? Who's responsible for monitoring it? Who's responsible for addressing it in a situation? And in this case, the sign could be used without being prompted. In other words, if the idea was that if she runs by crying, she can just signal to me that I'm okay, right? Or if I'm role playing in a game where I've been poisoned and I start choking, I could throw this up and to signal to anyone seeing me, I'm not really choking, don't save me, I'm just role playing and it's okay. But it has to do, but again, with who's responsible for monitoring that safety, the person, and I could tell people I'm okay, and I'm just saying that, or do I need someone to ask me, are you okay? I'm responsible for your safety, or I'm responsible for my own safety. And at least that hand signal kind of can go both ways. I can ask someone, are you okay? And at the same time, I can be responsible for my own safety and say, yeah, I'm okay. Something like that.
I'm going to continue on some of the things that have been mentioned earlier here. I've now been doing this for what, 40-ish years, close to that. And some of the techniques, more and more that my games delve into any sort of difficult topics or even something that's close, I've started to have at least 2 overlapping systems of signaling that there is something possibly wrong or problematic, and then having these kinds of okay signs as well, because both research and my experiences point out to some people finding touching the X card a lot more safe than showing any sort of sign which sort of implicates you as being reacting to something, and vice versa. Some feel the card is indeed too blatant, and I disliked it early on and have learned its advantages. But people tend to react in games especially to perceived or real lack of personal mental safety or something like that in ways that you can't really predict. And I had a recent experience where a topic came up because of game content that none of us okay, I lost connection for a while. I don't know how long I was rambling to.
No, you're okay. We got you.
Yes, so very briefly, just mentioning that I've had experiences where a topic has come up that was perceived by, for example, myself as the game master as something that is not problematic, but it conflicted very strongly with the player, and this leads to an immediate negotiation, either at that point or at the end of the session, because even with dozens of years of experience very actively on this, you can't predict everything. You can't list everything at the session 0, which I find a mandatory tool if you want to play it anyway near safe, but still be prepared to be completely surprised by something clicking the wrong way.
I could jump in on that. I think it's so interesting, the discussion about safety and sort of who sort of defines safety, how do we establish safety, maintain it. In particular in social work, sort of in the clinical side of what I do, safety has a relatively narrow kind of definition of like the mitigation of risk and sort of the evaluation moment by moment of via service delivery, is there something that I need to be paying more attention to right now? The context that I've mainly run Dungeons and Dragons with are at-risk and vulnerable youth. So high school aged kids in the US on the autism spectrum who have trauma histories. And the main sort of driver for that was the idea was to help kids, help the students sort of develop coping skills. So part of the way that we did that was introducing their characters to moments that were like distressing or stressful. So during our session 0, we talked about, okay, who's your character? What's their background? As we're playing, is there something that I should be aware of, that the group should be aware of, that we just really don't want to touch? Are there goals that you have? In this particular group of folks, these students didn't have a lot of sort of buy-in initially. It was sort of, well, you're dressing up therapy group as gaming, which they weren't wrong, but over the course of it, I really started to notice, and they did as well, that they did have meaningful skill development as a result of engaging in the sort of adventure group. And ultimately it came to like, as the clinician, as sort of the grown-up in the room, I'm sort of the point person for keeping things safe. That's my responsibility. And getting the players to sort of engage with that as well, saying I have a responsibility to respect the people that I'm playing with and recognize when they're not feeling safe or if something's wrong, and to try and support them through that.
Wow. Oh yeah, Garrett, you want to jump in?
Sorry. I guess mine's more of a question for the rest of you. Again, I believe less experience than everyone here. And I guess my question is, wouldn't safety be best addressed if we take the position of assuming something might be a problem until we get indication of otherwise? So, I mean, it's great that we have the X card, hand signals, etc. But if someone is looking distressed, does it ruin the game to just assume they're distressed until we find out otherwise? So ask them, are you in character or not in character? Or hand someone that asks that. That's my question.
I think that kind of sums up some of the threads that I was starting to see here in our conversation around, we named different techniques, both pre and during. So there's process techniques where it's how do we communicate while it's happening, but also what are the pre-techniques we did just concretely in advance that we set up. The nuances and the discourse of safety, which is also a group dynamics issue and is also an issue in social work or other settings already. There are already protocols and nuances. The flow of the game was mentioned, as well as you can't predict what's going to come up, temporal nature of what is a risk at different points in time, not being able to predict how you're going to react to things. And then the player action and interaction, as well as the facilitator, game master, and facilitator, therapist, educator, nature of all of this. And so I think the question of should we just assume that that it's problematic until we know otherwise is a question that comes up in other leadership contexts around group dynamics and safety as well. Even in non-game contexts. If we're in a group, how do I know if it's safe or not? And what is the experience of psychological safety in the group dynamic? And it is not so simple. So, Suzanne, I saw your hand go up.
Yep, and I think it builds on what you're saying, that it's not limited to the role-playing type of role-playing games you're talking about. What we're faced with is we're working with non-gamers, and we're in a catch and release situation. So people come to this Kiwanis Club meeting. We don't have session 0. They're not familiar with role-playing games. We don't ask them we don't change their characters. They're playing themselves, but we're changing context. Imagine there's a wildfire. You just got the alert. What are you going to do? How are you going to do this? So a lot of the safety signals, it's up to the facilitator to understand that there is that even is a safety issue. And believe me, we walk into it, we trigger we've been working in areas where people right now in wildfires have been through wildfires. They've lost their homes. So we never know when we're going to trigger something, some inner persona. So add that to the hopper of what if you don't have the opportunity to set up those safety signals with the player. Clearly, to Aaron's point, all safety issues are in the bailiwick of the facilitator.
So I'll call on Tomas and Antonio, and the other point that you raised that I was also thinking to wrap up the threads of the first round here is that the premise of this roundtable is on the use of role-playing games for research and or education, therapy, those kinds of things. And so there's a premise to this conversation that the games are being used for another purpose, not just leisure, and that there is an intention to do some sort of learning or development. And Mickey mentioned it's about gaining coping skills. And so there is an element of practice and maybe getting exposed to, but by choice with consent, which is a word that we haven't used yet, which is kind of implied in safety and a lot of things we're talking about. So the premise and the facilitation element of this are also an aspect of safety. Bill said the poll sort of nothing's ever painful, or we just avoid it at all costs, or no, there are certain nuances to how we engage in things intentionally for growth, because challenge and growth kind of go together. All right, Tomas.
Yeah, in my experience, thinking that too much of or wondering the whole time whether something is problematic and assuming it is whenever you see reactions from people distracts greatly in any sort of running this kind of game, especially with difficult content, whether it's a disaster simulation kind of situation or if it's a horror game for leisurely purposes. So if you're pondering all the time, then you're not probably running it good, and the people experiencing are not getting the full thing they signed up for. So in that sense, the safety mechanisms are also tools for not having to think about it all the time.
Ooh. Antonio had his physical hand up earlier. And also horror games were just mentioned, so maybe you're up.
I do happen to have a thing for horror games. No, I was just gonna say briefly, when you were listing all the possible variables that change the context, the type of game that you're, type of role play that you're engaging in is also crucial. The example that Aaron gave was with a LARP, and the level of immersion that and bleed that someone might experience in a LARP, it can be exponential compared to if we're just playing a one shot casually, trying to learn about active listening, or something like that. So I think that it's huge, but that's important also to keep in mind, because the odds of someone having a reaction when they start crying in a regular educational small role play session are low, which could indicate it could be actually a sign of something worse, like maybe trauma, because I know you deal with like fires and things like that. So maybe it could be an indicator of trauma. So knowing your audience and knowing the type of tools that you're doing and the range they have will give you a lot of context too.
Context matters. Aaron.
Yeah, thanks. There was a Nordic LARP essay that I did with Bettina Beck regarding using live action role playing and risk for the power of transformation. And it's a real interesting sort of topic because I look at there's participant safety, and then there's participant discomfort. And like Bill said, there is a spectrum, and it isn't necessarily, I mean, there's a certain level of safety you want, but at the other time, like if someone's just like, ew, that's gross, because they saw something, and is that necessarily bad? And so the definition of risk and how much risk is something that's very complicated, as we've been saying. And I think that at least my approach usually is finding a way to manage it, depending on what the subject matter of the experience is, to manage it, not necessarily always avoid it, because the work of Ida Benedetto, which is what I drew this paper off of, was really amazing, and she designed a lot of experiences that could be very distressing for people, but once they went through it, it had a very positive transformational effect on them. And the possibilities can be there. It's other words, it's like no pain, no gain in exercise, something like that. So it is something where at least I try to not necessarily avoid anything that's distressing. It's just sort of like expectations, transparency for the participants, and managing it, having a way to manage it, to recognize it, and then be able to deal with it instead of completely avoid it.
Garrett.
I was just going to ask Aaron for a link to that paper, but I think maybe he put it in the chat.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat.
Yep. No, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Anything burning in somebody's palm right now?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Suzanne.
No, go ahead, Nikki.
Okay, sorry. What we were just talking is that you said, Aaron, no pain, no gain. One of the 2023-2024 SHA Innovation Fellows that I presented with at Thinking Matters, his name's Owen. He did his project on stress recovery, and his sort of, the thrust of his research was, instead of stress avoidance, we might want to think about it in terms of stress recovery instead. So the way he kind of pitched it was in the language and sort of using concepts from like physical training. So if you have a really strong workout and you're sore later, most of the time, unless you really injure yourself, someone's going to say like, okay, well, that's normal. So rest, eat food, drink water. And Owen's position was that we might want to start thinking about emotional and psychological stress like that as well, in terms of not necessarily can we avoid it, because we can't always, or even most of the time, but rather sort of thinking about ways that we can recover from that. Yeah, you said that, and I was like, I have to plug Owen's project.
Yeah, and I think that to build on that a little bit, one of the things we find is when we trigger something, people want to tell us their stories. So they want to get that release of the experience that they've gone through in real life. That's an important role of putting them in the situation where they'll stand there with tears in their eyes about what happened. But it's therapeutic for them. So it is uncomfortable. There is a fine line there. And I was going to say, build on that I think with therapy and with a lot of pedagogy, andragogy teaching, and what we're doing, we're blurring the line for people between the in-game and their real life character, and that makes the safety particularly difficult to manage. You're sort of intentionally right on that boundary.
Right, there's a little bit of emojis happening in the chat, and Garrett, I saw you come off mute earlier. Was that because you had something you wanted to say right now, or?
It's Suzanne very much said it. There's that, what we're doing is we're blurring this line between reality and pretend. We're not having them create new characters. We're trying to have them be themselves in a pretend situation, or be the themselves that they might want to be in that pretend situation. And our experience so far has been mostly, almost entirely positive. That the distress that we have triggered, I think, has always been, like Suzanne said, they wanted to go through that distress to be able to share with us, as opposed to becoming distressed by what we're doing and thus couldn't deal with it. I mean, there might be a couple of, there's at least one exception I can think of, but it was very rare. So it is interesting that I think you guys are right, by not avoiding the stressful topic, we're getting a lot more out of it, and then able to talk to people who do get distressed.
Yeah, so a couple other things are coming up now. Oh, Antonio, good. I'm glad you're taking care of your injury as we talk about taking care of injury. And the physical wellness metaphor with emotional, mental wellness and fitness is alive out there in different discourses as well. So things that we've noticed us talking about is we keep implying consent, which is good, and because that could be a whole different conversation. And so I'm glad that we keep bringing it up, but we don't need to go all the way there. That there can be different types of consent, just as there are different types of techniques for safety in RPGs. There's the pre-consent, and then there's the how do we negotiate as an ongoing negotiation consent as it's happening and unhappening in the moments that's happening, and the communication of consent practices. Also towards, oh, I'm here to learn, or I'm glad that I'm going through something hard because I am learning from it. Whether it's I tried to do it or it's happening and now I can appreciate it as well. And the resilience piece, and also the framing. So, and I know a lot of times in RPGs, you talk about frames as like character, person, player, but I'm actually talking about the educational framing of the experience in the context. So session 0 is a way to frame playing a role-playing game. Having different conversations, debriefs, check-in conversations, any other associated adjacent activities that go with the actual game itself that aren't necessarily part of the game, but are part of the experience the person has around or through the game, is what I mean by framings. In US education context, we call that scaffolding. Right. And I'm sure there are, therapy versions of this as well, too, of what are the things that we do around the game that help with this. And I think the care, right, aspect is very important. So we see somebody in distress, we offer care and support. And that may happen out of game or after game kinds of things, and how do we help people with the resilience and the putting yourself back together again parts of all this. So Aaron, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks. Great stuff that you're bringing up, because what I noticed in immersive theater, which is adjacent to live action role playing events sort of situation, and a lot of the techniques we talk about, sometimes like session 0 happens before the activity, and we have a debrief which is after the activity. But I think it's really interesting to, during the activity, have certain things to use. And something that I haven't tried yet, but I really want to, is to empower the participants to control the level of engagement and interactivity as they're going. And the example that I want to use is having some kind of like an armband or a headband that's different colors for the participant to put on, and they choose to put on the one they want. And red is like, leave me alone, don't interact with me. Yellow is, I'm okay, medium level interaction. But green is one like, bring it, I'm willing for it. And I think that, I think what's important to me is that the participant has a level of control, and they're empowered to decide how much engagement they want. In other words, again, to use the analogy of working out, having someone, no, I can take more weight. I can take more, bring more. And I've had that in some LARPs before, that someone will ask like, no, that's okay. You can push more. That's okay to push more. And that there needs to kind of be a signal for that you can say, no, pile it on. I want to try more. So I do think that's one thing. Also, if the participant knows that they can control that they know like, okay, I'm empowered to kind of set my level and my limits, and I can adjust this as the thing continues. I think that's a very comforting thing, that or at least it is to me, that I know like, okay, I can always back off if I need to, but if I'm like, nah, give me some more, I could take that. That's very comforting, knowing that I have the limits, instead of what happens a lot of times, I've noticed in some games, is a binary switch. So a lot of times in extreme horror events or immersive theater events, there's a safe word. They use a safe word, and you say the safe word, and then you're out of the situation. But that's like, I paid $80 for this, and I say the safe word, and now I only got 5 minutes or something like that. That it's a binary choice, which I personally don't like, where it's like you say a safe word and then you're out and you can't get back in. So I would like to encourage, and I want to try and do this myself, a level of control that the participants have.
Yeah, I've also heard of the pause button. So it's not a you're in or out, but it's a pause, check in, and then game on, right? So this is also bringing up other questions. When you were talking about the armbands, I liked the example, and I also thought of support roles that I've heard of happening. Talk about the roles, not of the characters that are being role played, but of the players as players within a group. And this happens in all groups, work groups, leadership groups, playing game groups, families, these kinds of things, that people play support roles. And so it can be roles for game moderators. There's game masters, and there are also moderators who maybe they wear the support armband to, like, if you need water or you need someone to like check in on you, I'm the person wandering around the game here for the specific purpose of doing that. And sometimes that falls on a formal role, and sometimes it's an informal role, like players, like maybe your wife's playing and you want to check in on each other, or maybe players play with each other for a while and are caring about each other, or just caring about strangers that they're meeting while they're playing. And so there's player support, informal roles, and also a lot of responsibility that we're implying on the facilitator, which makes sense given that we're also talking about it in the context of education and therapy and leadership development. And in terms of consent, the agency piece is the trauma-informed care aspect that I know is out there, of like, I choose how to engage with the safety tools and with the game. And then the role of the facilitator. We are also here under the premise that some of us do research about this. And so in research, definitely the United States, and also I think abroad, the safety and consent and informed consent standards that came out of the post-World War II and research problem era, they exist. There are institutional review boards that say people have informed consent. They have agency to say when and how they were going to participate and when they're going to step out. Now, that is kind of a if you're out kind of thing, but there's some overlap, although it may also be more nuanced and different to the dual role of research and participating in RPGs. So we've got a lot there with research, facilitator / researcher, facilitator / game master. But I'm interested in steering us towards, okay, so what are the roles of what safety roles exist amongst facilitators, players, formal and informal, or otherwise?
And I just wanted to leap on what you just brought up, which is I've been thinking about what are the ethics of when you're trying to push people for research reasons. You're trying to push them into something because you want some research question, that whole ethics issue. Even aside from even if within IRB, you may be setting ethics boundaries that you think are beyond, that IRBs don't cover. And to your second question, roles, I was thinking about, we've done a little bit of this in some of the work we've done with Aaron, is having NPCs that you can send in to mitigate if something's happening. You know, when we're doing disaster, in a live action disaster, we do have the option of sending someone in pretending to be a police officer or a firefighter who is a trusted person that people suddenly, you know, that introduces an element of confidence and safety for most people.
I mean, I will say that in regards to research, though, IRB won't let you do your research if there's potential for harm, like real harm, even psychological. So in my experience, what I had to do, while the harm was minimal, because we were just playing Avatar, the role-playing game, I had to have their the content information for the FSU's counseling center, and a little bit of a paragraph on this free service that they can contact to, that we can stuff if needed. There's also the consent forms that they have to go in advance. They're not going in blind that you're gonna go through this emotional hardship, even if it's just role play. There has to be some sort of consent going in. What do you think, Joe?
But your study was interesting because you were the researcher, but you weren't the game master.
I was not.
So I mean, in terms of what you're saying about your role as the researcher and then the facilitator's role, and so the support you provided in terms of here's the counseling center, right, was required by the IRB to provide support resources to participants, regardless of any intention of pushing, right?
Right, like the facilitator had to even let them know that was available from the very beginning.
Yeah, and one point without remember what we're doing. We are not subject to any IRB. We control that ourselves, and so that's up to us to understand what responsibilities we have, which is why it's a more difficult topic for us, that we're not under IRB and participants aren't coming to be research participants. They're coming for a community event and have some fun. So, managing the line.
Yeah, Aaron.
Sorry to keep jumping in on all this, but it just keeps coming up. It's all stuff that's relevant. So we're doing, me and a couple others are doing a LARP census. We're bringing that back, and we're doing it with Marist College. And to do this census, we had to get the IRB. I had to take a course program on human research, social and behavioral research. So I had a deep dive on the common rule and all of those issues that are in there for a simple online sort of research, project. I'm not affiliated with the university. Ryan Patty's not affiliated with the university, but we're still going through this with Karen Schreier, she's with Marist College. So Suzanne, I think that the issue is there's a lot of very good necessary standards to go through, and I think it's possible to take even if you're not with an IRB, you could still follow the same guidelines that they recommend, that they go through, that you could take this course. I have to refresh. I just got my thing. I need to renew my certificate, essentially, that I can participate with research with human subjects. And there's restrictions. There's definitely restrictions on it. If you're observational and not doing anything, that's one. But if you are asking them for anything, are there images being used? Or can they be identified? Where's their data being stored? Right? All this information. There's a lot in there, and I think it behooves researchers to say, take that course or something like it, or find someone who can design the research study that is following guidelines. Even if there isn't an IRB, if you can find some people or take the course yourself, you could still follow those guidelines, even though you don't have a formal IRB association with it. But I think that helps, and that lends credence to the data, the research, anything that comes out of that. You could say we've abided by all of these topics for safety and research consent, even though there wasn't necessarily an IRB, so that any data coming out of that has a better reliability factor. And they're not thinking that like, oh, I manipulated it or tricked someone into doing something, and they know that you followed by these standards.
Yeah, in my own experience advising and conducting research, I think the IRB stuff is all useful and necessary, especially from a research perspective. And I also think it's inadequate from a role-playing game perspective. And so I'm curious if, maybe other researchers and practitioners like Mickey or Tomas or Bill have experiences or opinions about the research of role-playing games and anything there.
I would love to jump in on that because as we sort of been talking, thinking about the project that I put forth, the book, talking about therapy and Dungeons and Dragons. Initially, that project was meant to include data that I'd been collecting in the course of my work at the day treatment program where I've been interacting with these students. So these are minors, they're vulnerable, at risk, lots of things going on there. And it was a real challenge to get everything sort of squared away with the IRB, consent forms, assent forms for the kids, talking with the special education department, just a whole lot of moving pieces. And ultimately, unfortunately, I wasn't able to use that data, partly because I'm a relatively new researcher and I didn't feel fully confident that I could maintain safety and maintain my sort of clinical responsibility while also sort of trying to like finagle a way for me to use this data. Because as much as I would have loved to share that, and I can sort of share like my experience from it, that's fine. But yeah, just I agree with you, Joe, about the IRB piece. Like I think it is so important, and going through that process was really enlightening for me. And there are also places where we can do better, I think, and we need to sort of think about other ways that we can help ensure safety as well as rigorous data to share with other folks.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a barrier. Oh, Bill, we'll go to you first.
I don't know that I have much to say. I just wanted to it's not clear to me just to what extent IRBs are interested in rigor so much as they're interested in safety, interested in risk mitigation. And So it feels, and don't get me wrong, I believe in the mission of the IRB, and I think that's an important part of what we do. But to a certain extent, I feel like it's about the protection of human subjects. It's not about ensuring that the research is rigorous in a way, although depending upon the analyst that you get, that may be something that they care about. And so the issue becomes, and I think, Joe, you were speaking to this, is so if you're researching role-playing games, either in situ or in some sort of theoretical way, how do you make sure that A, you're not doing anything to your subjects that would trigger any of the kinds of human protections concerns that have to do with right to privacy, issues of informed consent, and so forth, as well as making sure that you're sort of gathering data that means something, and to a certain extent those may, but maybe not, come into conflict. So I don't know. I don't have any more to say than that, so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
That's good. It's along the lines of, yeah, again, many ways to slice the IRB's protection of human subjects that does and doesn't also necessitate rigor or present barriers to collecting data or enable actual safety for participants, and usefulness of research. And this makes me think about how the kind of there seem to be these practices that are becoming more and more written about, but aren't really, or are kind of researched, but there's not like well, I guess recently I saw the handbook of role-playing games got redone, but I think there's a lot out there in the practical knowledge base that is not known in the academic knowledge base, because we can't get the data, or we can't write about it in the right way, or something like that. But I only have my period of time of experience reading and researching these things. So if others have things to add with that, please do, in terms of how to, and maybe it's because we can't be conclusive, because there's so much nuance to it, and maybe it's disciplinary. It's another problem I run into with games and research is, am I researching it as a scholarship person, as a psychology person, as a game person, as a design person, as a pop culture person, all these different things. Yeah, Suzanne.
Yeah, I just want to bring into the IRB discussion is when IRB methods and restrictions are more restrictive than they need to be. Because I run into the opposite. Yes, if I follow IRB rules, I mean, research background, my tendency is I got to protect their privacy. I got to protect personal information at all costs. But I'm at this fair and people want their names on social media. They want their pictures up there, and I need them for, to promote what we're doing. So it's, if I approach it strictly from IRB, then, I'm cutting off some of what the people there want, and also business marketing stuff. So there's that balance where it's, yeah, they have a testimonial, they rave about this, what they're doing, they want people to see it. I have lots of people who love to have their names in the paper and stories told, right? And you're doing it with their permission. But if you're operating under IRB, I have to protect, that's all private information.
Garrett, are you waiting?
She said it.
All right.
Yeah.
So noting the time, and I do want to be able to do a wrap-up round, I want to kind of pivot us to the kind of a combination of like, what's the dual role of facilitator, which we've kind of been talking about in the research sense, but maybe just as a facilitator of a game, if you're the game master and the therapist at the same time, or having those as two different roles, those kinds of things, implications for this, and the question about, can it be assessed and measured? So that's our, is safety, there's so many nuances and contextualities to it, and can emotional and psychological safety be assessed and measured, and both for research purposes and for practical purposes. And I will say from a research perspective, yes, psychological safety can be measured, but in which contexts may be still up for debate. And in particular, in regards to facilitating role-playing games, Antonio and I have a model of some data we've analyzed to kind of talk about this as well. So, Antonio, do you want to give the elevator pitch for the findings related to measuring this?
It's not on the top of my head right now. So if you have it
Okay,
available,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not using my computer or anything. I'm using my wife's.
Yeah, basically, we tried to link facilitation to intended outcomes like creativity. And so does playing a role-playing game depend on the facilitation in order to get the outcome? And psychological safety and group cohesion were mediating variables. And so, but they came out when we did factor analysis as clarity and support were the psychological safety elements. So is it clear? Are we all on the same page? We are confident we know what we're doing here and what's happening. And then do I feel like I'm supported by the people I'm playing with? They actually mediated the facilitator's impact on creativity. So facilitation didn't determine creativity. It's interaction with clarity and support and feeling like you're a member of the group is what did it. So there's a group dynamics element of psychological safety in addition to the facilitator, is what our data suggest. And that's the model that we're kind of using now moving forward. But it can be assessed and measured through different scales, although those were surveys. So the in the moment pieces are maybe a little bit more difficult to assess from a practical standpoint. So what are people's thoughts about those distinctions?
I just throw in one wrench to that, not really responding to you, but I'm just reminded of something that we said earlier or just now is in any of the sciences of complexity, it's hard to make solid conclusions. This goes from sociology to psychology to some of the harder sciences that are now getting into complex systems. So it does raise the issue, which I was saying before, is IRB too restrictive or not restrictive enough? If it requires logical conclusions, which you can never have in a complex system. So that's one concern I have.
Yeah, maybe it's irrelevant if we can assess it in a generalizable sense. If when I'm sitting at the table or at the LARP, what do you do in the moment? Mickey?
So, and this is a little bit of a sort of a more narrow view of it, but in terms of creating clarity is important, establishing safety for my groups that I run. I am going back again to that session 0, and every excuse me, every subsequent session that we had, the first thing we did was review our group norms, rules, and expectations. And these were set with the players at session 0, saying what do we expect from ourselves and expect from other people. And that way it's really clear that if there's an interaction that goes south or something that comes up, we can point to, the group norms and say, okay, maybe we're having a hard time right now, or there's something contentious that might be happening, or we're just really not sure what to do next. Instead of maybe getting frustrated, you can kind of tell I'm working with teenagers here. I'm sort of precluding to I know that we're all feeling some stuff. But yeah, I think again, just that clarity and support that you said, really kind of providing this foundation of I know what to expect, at least on some level, to some extent.
All right, so to give us time for a kind of a to be continued wrap up, pseudo wrap up. Oh, thanks for that link, Sam. So sort of closing round, everyone, you can choose to pass if you really don't want to share, of course. Here's our consent rule, right? To kind of share what's on your mind as we're wrapping up this conversation. That could be something you've learned, a question you had, something you're seeing differently, just something that seems salient or apparent to you. So you have some leeway. And in terms of direction, it's just what's on your mind as we are wrapping up this conversation about this topic.
No one else wants to leap in, I can start us off, because this last topic pulled a lot of things together for me. In this concern of, if we're working with this catch and release model, not deeply into role-playing games in terms of giving people, not giving people a character, but changing their circumstances. The concept of session 0 and what Mickey just said with norming, setting group norms. For us, particularly with our group game, thinking about, can we incorporate miniature session 0s, group norm setting, and it is actually part of the role play, because one of the things we're ultimately trying to help people learn is those skills, because those are important social collaborative skills. You have you're standing there with a group of strangers. If you start off with, wait a minute, let's talk a little bit about these things and set some group norms, that actually be an incredibly valuable addition to the role-playing game itself.
And as your reflections become apparent, go ahead and just indicate or come off mute and go for it.
Mine is more, I don't have like a contextual, like the not contextual, a specific point, but I'm just reflecting on, as you know, Sam, you and I, Joe, are writing a book right now on leadership and through RPGs. So what is that chapter going to look like when it comes to the conversation of safety?
Yeah, and I'll just, my takeaway is that I remain interested in the history of the discourse of safety and how it gets talked about in different different circuits, including the hobbyist community, the practical application communities of different sorts, and the way that it ramifies out into different contexts, I think is interesting.
One of the issues that I persistently have to deal with, kind of as a producer of immersive events and LARPs, is the fact that handling all the safety concerns and the session 0 and stuff takes time, and time is quite valuable. And I have not found the answer. Some of the events that we've done have been criticizing for having too much workshopping beforehand, even though it's like 10 minutes. But if you're going to, say, a 2-hour event and you're spending 10 to 15 minutes just hearing the rules and safety and things like that, like that's a chunk of time, especially if someone's paying for that event. So it's a conundrum that I haven't solved yet on how to present the rules, make sure that people understand the rules in the situation, maybe in the fiction itself, but also as quickly and seamlessly as possible so that the participants can get to the fun and enjoyment. And the other issue that I try to deal with myself when I have stuff is I don't necessarily want to know what other people's trigger points are. So when I run a tabletop role-playing game at a convention, which is among strangers, I usually have people write down anonymously if they are, because I don't want to necessarily know, oh, that person's scared of spiders, so ha ha ha, if I want to scare you, I don't necessarily want to know what someone else's points are. I also want their privacy to be respected so that other strangers don't know it. So how do you deal with that, right? You don't want to, hit a trigger point, but at the same time, I don't necessarily even want to know what your trigger points are. So those are issues. If anybody finds a solution to them, please let me know, because I'm dealing with it a lot. Thanks.
We'll go with Samantha and then Tomas.
I was just gonna say something that we hadn't really touched upon, which kind of goes into what you were just saying, Aaron, was aftercare. So things that and aftercare I came across this actually within probably more of a taboo section of society during one of my research sections of college. But looking into people's like just checking in with them after a session, if there's been like a very high stress day or a high stress facilitation, that's been one of the biggest benefits, I should say, is just following through with some of the aftercare practices that have helped.
Yeah, I'm gonna continue a bit on what Aaron mentioned, because I have a deep dislike of pre-game workshops or pre-event workshops in general, which tend, in my opinion, to run way too long and be way too boring. And again, I'm a huge fan of having debriefings, but having them very structured and efficient, also because many times if you have serious themes of any kind, then you need the aftercare time as well. And if you're basically blocking that with too much of a debriefing, then you're again doing harm to the players. So what I tend to do, for instance, is that when designing a game, I have this kind of open information sheet. So I try to think about the more likely problem points. And while I do not want all the secrets to go out, I kind of create this sheet of things that I can mention as a kind of checklist, that you will probably be exposed to these sorts of content in the game without telling too much. And then hoping that they sort of extrapolate based on that. So I'm trying to find the breaking points of my own design, or the one that I'm presenting, and offering people a chance to engage with it beforehand, which is, in my opinion, often better than during play.
Garrett or Mickey?
I'm thinking a lot about a lot of things. A lot of things. I'm excited to take all of this and sort of process. I think I'm particularly interested in sort of the overlap between sort of different fields of study, this interdisciplinary kind of way of understanding what is safety, what are games, what does game facilitation look like, that and some of the practical things that you've all mentioned, like X cards, hand signals, for ways I can beef up my groups and sort of cultivate a more safe, supportive, and ideally therapeutic environment.
I'm wondering, because we've experienced the difficulty of a round zero discussion being too long, just too boring, just people get started. And I wonder if it is at all possible to address safety issues throughout the game, instead of all at once at the beginning, as you come up to a point that might be a breaking point, as Thomas phrased it, then address it. Again, it's assuming you can anticipate all those breaking points, but maybe distributing it through the game might reduce the burden of that zero session. And then I'm thinking, on the other hand, that might break the rhythm of the game and the feel of being immersed in the game's space. Not sure.
I am holding the paradox that is the paradox of safety, and I don't think it's resolvable, so I'm not going to try to resolve it, but I am going to try to hold the whole paradox and all of its parts that don't go together, even though they're all stuck together. in the sense of safety is part of a human experience, group being a part of a group, is it an individual? Are the individuals having the same experience as the group? How do you navigate the individual's experience versus the group's experience? Do you do it ahead of time? Do you do it during? These are all the same human experience questions we face in leadership contexts and all human contexts, I think, when we get together as humans and experience things. I'm holding on to all of the nuance, and I think it's important to hold the paradox and the questions as we go. And answers in particular moments will reveal themselves as correct and incorrect all the time. So wonderful discourse, tremendous mix of ideas and backgrounds and perspectives and suggestions and questions, tons of golden conversation and learning and all of that. So thank you all for your participation, and that flew by. So I will conclude this part of the roundtable there, and I'll hand it back to Suzanne if there are any housekeeping items or closing remarks. Good job, everybody. Thanks for playing.
Thank you all. I think this is the best roundtable we've had. Good discussion. What we will do is we have been recording. We neglected to ask permission to record. Does anyone have not want us to record them? We will do the AI generated transcript and summary, and it's so that we can get something out to you quickly. Eventually, we will post the recording. I do some editing on it, a little bit of light editing, and eventually have a cleaned up transcript. But in the interest of getting something out quickly, we'll release the AI versions to you. And if we have everyone's email, make sure everyone has everyone's email. I know a lot of us know each other already. If in the interest of collaboration, and if you would like a different topic to bring this group and other people together, we would love to hear other topics and what you'd like to talk about. And there may be a continuation of this topic in our future generalization. Please let us know. We're happy to host roundtables and see who we can bring in. Thank you all.